and get started. It's 2:00, so welcome. Thank you for being here. Because part of me answering that question is one of the reasons why we're here. And so I just was, I've been in education for such a long time, and I've seen a lot of inequities, particularly in education. And I feel like I've been struggling with what I see a lot of times because the high school that I went to in particular was very diverse, very welcoming, very open, and then very nurturing. And then they unleashed us to the real world. And I think I'm constantly surprised by what happens in the real world on a daily basis. And so a lot of times, I have conversations about race with, people that I know, whether they are Black or brown. And, the conversation is very different when I have these conversations about race with white people that I know. And so, and oftentimes a lot of that is met with resistance and defensiveness. And so I just was wondering, I'm like, well, what kinds of conversations do white people have amongst their racial peers about race? And it's not necessarily a formal conversation, but I mean, does it come up, and how does it come up? And so it just got me thinking about, I was curious. I just wanted to know. I've been fortunate enough to have white people in my life that, when I have brought up issues of race, they have not shied away from me. I feel comfortable talking about issues of race with some white people, right? And others, I just don't. I'm just not going to have the conversation. And so I was just thinking, well, what would it look like to witness a conversation amongst white people about race? And so essentially, that's why I wanted to have this conversation. The other issue is, like, whenever I do see conversations amongst white people about race, typically it's led by professionals or people who've studied it. And, it's like, it's one thing to have, an expert to discuss race and to lead a conversation, to facilitate a conversation. But I'm just like curious about, okay, what about my neighbor? Or what about the teacher that I work with? Or just, regular folks that I interact with that have that are not necessarily experts in this topic, And so, that's kind of where I landed on this. And so then with everything that's happening in the world, I just wanted to kind of think about, what kind of impact could I make, outside the school system that I work with? Like, what changes can I lead? What could I do? And so I figured one thing that I could do was just ask my, a few of my Facebook friends, would they be willing to participate in this conversation? And then I was thinking, I'm wondering if other people would be interested in witnessing this conversation as well. So Charlotte, I don't really have a plan for this recording. It's just a record of the conversation, and if people are interested in it, then they can witness it too. I recognize there's a certain risk that I have asked you to take on, and I totally appreciate you still being willing to do so. But what I will say on the record is, if this becomes viral and the Daily Show, Trevor Noah wants to talk to us, I'm definitely calling each and every one of you and saying, take a road trip. We're all in this together.
Don't laugh. I have a friend whose grandson was on Trevor Noah because his video went viral.
Yeah, I mean, hey, Ellen, I'm down, So I just wanted to, I mean, that's kind of where, let me pull in my video again. So that's kind of where we are right now with that. And I'm just like really excited that you all decided to participate in this with me, and you know, willing to take the risk. It means a lot that you know, agreed to do this. I've never facilitated a conversation like this before. And so after talking with Sandra, you know, I asked Margaret to help me moderate the conversation. So that's where we are. So that's it. So let me introduce everyone. I know we chit-chatted a little bit. Perry came on. So as I mentioned, I'm Gabrielle Thurmond. I am an educator, Black woman. I try to be as much of an activist as I can. I love my dog. And, you know, I'm just here today because I wanted to be a support to everyone as I could be. Marley and Sandra and I taught at Washington Elementary School together for a few years. And then Charlotte, I don't even know what your title was at Washington.
Reform coordinator.
I just know, oh, sorry, Bougie's climbing up on me. Sorry, get down, Bougie. I just know that whenever I needed something, Charlotte, you just came through for me. So that's how I know you to be the person through. And even when I was an assistant principal at Nystrom, whenever I needed something, you were available. So, and then Margaret, I met Margaret working at Washington as well. I went through the early childhood resources training. And then after that, our paths crossed. And so we have continued a professional and personal relationship since then. And then I think after Washington, I went to Summerbridge, and that's where I met Holly. I think we were all in our early 20s, a bunch of us just kind of hanging out in this independent summer program in San Francisco. And so that's where I met Holly. And I left there to work in Emeryville. And I think it was my second year in Emeryville, I met Holly Coombs, and Holly was my student teacher. So I had this bougie. And so Holly, Holly and I had some good times in the classroom. And then I left there and went to the Dominican Republic and taught for a couple years, and that's where I met Perry. But Perry, you and I we didn't really interact a whole lot because you were at the high school level, right? Yeah, so we would see each other because we were both foreign teachers. So, you know, we got to experience a few perks. It's so nice to see you again. And of course, Mr. Carney, he started it all. I don't know if I told you this, Mr. Carney, but you're the reason why I got into UC Berkeley, because I remember first assignments in English class was bring your college essays, we're gonna work on them. And I so appreciated that homework assignment because that meant I didn't wait to the last minute to get my essay done. So that's who's in the room. So with that, I think I'm going to go ahead and pass the baton to Margaret. I have asked Margaret to moderate this conversation because I have sat in space with her, and I think she's a great facilitator. And I think she would be a great person to lead you all through this conversation. So she's going to create the container to hold the discussion. And in the meantime, I'm going to go dark, and I will be listening in the background. And once the conversation is over, then I will come back. All right?
Sounds good.
All right.
Thank you, Gabrielle.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gabrielle. Well, first, thank you for coming along on this journey. Gabrielle didn't choose me because I'm an expert in having conversations about race or whiteness. So my work in the last 20 years has been helping teachers to explore how their inner lives impact their work in the world. So our identity as a person incorporates how we see race and how we see ourselves as a person with race, whether it be, even though, as we'll learn, as we're learning or we've learned or we're unpacking, race is an arbitrary construct, and yet it impacts all of us so much. So with that, Gabrielle sent you the agenda, so you know transparently like how I'm moving through this. And I would just like us to start with a moment of silence, because dismantling racism is heartbreaking work. And for everybody involved, which includes the planet, particularly those whose lives have been lost by racism. So I'd just like to start with a moment of silence, and then I'll bring us back in, and feel comfortable closing your eyes if you'd like to, and just calling to mind anything or anyone that you feel comforted by in this time. Thank you. To have conversations that matter, I think it's important to create a container to do so. And these 5 agreements that were sent out are ones that I have felt create a trustworthy space. But more than that, they also create a space that's a little charged, that allows people to say what's on their heart, as long as they're staying within, speaking from their heart, and not to another person, but rather just what is in your heart and mind, from a place of kindness as opposed to niceness. And the first is to stay present in as engaged as you can. Bring yourself fully. When we're online, we have a tendency to check our email and do other stuff. We can be very distracted. So if we could encourage one another just to stay present in this time. We're going to try to keep this discussion to an hour. With we're done by 4, but it may be earlier if we get through this, and then we can have some time to debrief a little. So instead of preparing your responses to others when you're listening, just trying to listen without it being, oh, what would I say in rebuttal to that? Or what would I say? And just noticing if you have those thoughts that come up around, oh, this is feeling triggering to me. Oh, that's an interesting thing to notice and wonder why that is, and turning a bit to wonder on that. It's sometimes uncomfortable to talk about things like race. And so if it feels uncomfortable, just be really mindful of that and notice those feelings, notice the discomfort without judgment of yourself. Judging yourself as much as judging others will stop your process, will stop you from being engaged. So if you feel that you'd like to say something, just kind of watch how that's feeling for you, and then just being mindful of your own reactions to it, and try to enter into the discussion then by just speaking your truth. And that's the third one. Really notice what has heart and meaning for you in what you'd like to say, and be open to saying it regardless of what you think others may be wondering about. And speak in a way that allows you to say what you need to without you making the judgment that someone else is wrong. So two truths can be held at the same time without judgment about which you believe in or agree with, and can be heard. And part of that, when that happens, it turns us into a place of uncertainty and non-closure, because maybe we don't know yet what we really think about something. So learning to kind of accept that and expect it really in conversations like this, like, well, that's going to happen. I find that to be super helpful for me, that if I go into something thinking I'm going to learn and it's going to get fixed and we're all going to be on the same page, then I have a lot more tension when I'm leaving if that hasn't happened. And so I think learning to both expect and accept that non-closure, we won't all feel the same at the end, can be really helpful. And then lastly, just process-wise, try to remember how many times you've spoken and for how long, and see if we can, I'll try to engage all of our voices, but to keep that as each one of us individually as a personal aspiration to hold that equity of voice with one another. So any other things that you feel need to be stated in terms of what we might agree on for you, so that you feel comfortable in this space, that you feel that you're going to get something else out of it? Anybody?
Margaret, I just want to, if we want to speak, is there some way you want us to acknowledge that? Or you?
Yeah, I'll go through that process now, Charlotte. Yeah, thank you. So the way that we'll do it is just like we'll raise our hands. So down below, there's a little, you can go into the participants and find yourself. And usually, I mean, every Zoom call is different, so I'm not even sure. Does this have a hand raise feature on it?
I don't see it.
Okay, then we'll just use the reaction feature.
Oh, yes, no, it's there. It's there. There's a raise hand at the bottom of it.
Where? If you touch more, maybe? Do you have a more button?
If you're on a iPad, you touch more, and you'll see it. On the computer screen, there's I can lower my hand and raise my hand.
I don't have that on my phone.
See my hands up? Can you see that my hand up?
Yeah,
And
that's where I'm noticing that it's on some and not others.
Yeah.
If you're on an iPad, it's up in the right corner where under more.
Yeah, I don't see it.
Yeah, I'm not sure I have it, because I have a button that says lower all hands, but it's not highlighted, so it doesn't work. So I think everybody has reactions. At the bottom of the participants page, it says more, and then it says.
It depends upon what device you're on.
Yeah,
my
I don't
iPhone
have it on mine, so I'm not sure why.
I have thumbs up and clapping on my reactions.
That's what I have too. We could
So
just
I
go
think
old
if you
school.
look at reactions, you can put your hand, you can do a little thumbs up. We'll do thumbs up like that. You have your hand's raised.
Okay.
And otherwise, there's not very many of us. We're all on one screen for me. So you can go like this too. And I'll just try to. And if I don't notice you, you can also say, excuse me. So we'll see how it goes. And then to put your little thumbs up down, you just click on it again. No, it goes away on its own. So there you go. So I wasn't sure how that was going to work with the different Zoom formats, but we'll try the thumbs up, and then this is always okay too. So all of you, or some of you, submitted some questions, and Gabrielle and I went through those. And then we also encouraged you to think of a passage from this book. So we're using the book Why Fragility as kind of a starting place, but it doesn't have to be just a discussion of the book. If things emerge, we'll just take that path and we'll go that direction. So after we, I'll ask a question after we do a round of the passage from the book. If you have one and you want to lift it up for us, we'll just hear those from everyone. And then I'll just go around and take the questions in order and just ask you, what do you think about this? And you can say anything, and then anybody who wants to respond and have their voice heard on that can raise their hand, and we'll just see, is it one person wants to respond or everyone wants to respond? And we'll just take it like that. So it's kind of free flowing, but I'll try to just make sure we stay on pace with it, okay? And also, if I'm noticing any of the agreements, I might say something about, let's remember to speak from our own experience and our own heart without fixing or judging another person. So let's just get started then. And we'll go around, and I'll start with Marley, because Molly's the only one I've ever really, I think, been in the room with for long periods of time, long time ago.
Well, it's good to be in the room with you, Margaret.
It's a delight to be back. So Molly, were you able to pick a short passage or something from the book that you resonated with you?
Yeah, I did. I mean, there were obviously many passages that, I kind of highlighted. So going through it, I thought, what am I going to choose? But one of the things that jumped out at me is not because the passage was so interesting, but the whole idea of people saying that they're colorblind and kind of using that as something that's getting in the way of them facing their own racism. And I always thought, like, well, who says, like, I've never heard anybody say that, but I know that it's a thing. But then it kind of just seems like, well, that sounds so silly. But then as there were a couple passages in the book that made me think, well, I think that often white people, in my experience, feel that way about children or their children. And that, so I have a couple just short quotes that she wrote. One said, she said, children learn that it is openly taboo to talk about race. And she also says, most white parents and teachers believe that children are colorblind, and this false belief keeps us from honestly addressing racism with children and exploring with them how racism has shaped the inequities that they have already observed. And that struck a chord with me because it is, I think, something that white people do, because people of color, particularly people of color with children, there's no such thing as being taboo talking about race. It's, a matter of survival and of protection. But I do see this, in schools that I've been in where, with young children, parents or white parents and even white liberal parents have been averse to having certain content in the classroom, not because they're against the content, but because they're against their children's having to face the fact that there's racism in the world. So, and I have a 7-year-old and a 10-year-old, and the 10-year-old in particular, is at that point where he's asking a lot of questions. There's always, a radio on or or a book around, and he asks a lot of questions. So it's just, that just struck a chord with me, because I'm trying to be honest with him and with everything that's going on now and always, about giving him straightforward answers rather than pushing them aside.
Thank you, Molly. How about you, Charles? Was there a passage? Did you highlight something you'd like to just lift up to get us started?
I did. I found this to be really sort of the crux of her whole discussion in the book. She had a pretty straightforward thesis at the beginning, and she kept coming back to it again and again. I think not because she was being repetitive, but because she thought it would help reinforce, to keep reminding us that that there's a bigger picture here than just individual racism. And that was on page 21, right near the bottom. It says, let's see. Oh, I'm sorry, at the top. Similarly, racism, like sexism and other forms of oppression, occurs when a racial group's prejudice is backed by legal authority and institutional control. This authority and control transforms individual prejudices into a far-reaching system that no longer depends on the good intentions of individual actors. It becomes the default of the society and is reproduced automatically. Racism is a system, and I would be remiss if I did not acknowledge the intersection of race and gender in the example of suffrage. White men granted suffrage to women, but only granted full access to white women. Women of color were denied full access until the Voting Rights Act of 1965. I thought that, as you know, I've never given a whole lot of thought to this particular argument, but it's such a compelling argument that there is that we are, we're like the old parable of the fish who are swimming around desperate to find water. We live in a racial structure that we're desperately trying to say, well, where is the racism? I don't see the racism. You keep yelling about racism, but I don't see, you know, I'm not prejudiced against people. I've never kept anybody down. I've never denied anyone a job. And it becomes the personal defense rather than a quiet pause to just understand that this is an institutional problem that requires an institutional response, but the response from the institution has to come from individuals. It's a kind of an odd catch-22, but it's not impossible. It just requires a lot of uncomfortable reflection, pretty much. That's all I got about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Charles. Name being a great paradox. I think that you just lifted up for us. Thank you. I think we're all like looking at each other in different order. At least that's my experience on Zoom. So I'm just kind of going around in the order that's on my screen. So Charlotte, you're next on my circle.
And there are so many passages. This was one of the hardest assignments I had, trying to decide which one, because there were so many that stood up. But I picked this one to read today. It's on page 87, because I felt it was more optimistic. It gave me hope, at least. And it says, most of us alive before and during the 1960s have had images from the civil rights conflicts of that time held up as the epitome of racism. Today, we have images of white nationalists marching in Charlottesville, Virginia to hold up. And while speaking up against these explicitly racist actions is critical, we must also be careful not to use them to keep ourselves on the good, with parentheses or quotation marks around it, the word good, side of a false binary. I have found it much more useful to think of myself as on a continuum. Racism is so deeply woven into the fabric of our society that I do not see myself escaping from that continuum in my lifetime. But I can continually seek to move further along it. I'm not in a fixed position on the continuum. My position is dictated by what I am actually doing at a given time. Conceptualizing myself on an active continuum changes the questions from whether I am or am not a racist to a much more constructive question. Am I actively seeking to interrupt racism in this context? And perhaps even more importantly, how do I know? And I like that passage because I can see myself moving on the continuum.
Thank you, Charlotte. How about Sandra?
Okay, the passage that I chose is on page 144. And she says, white people need to find out for themselves what they can do. There's so much excellent advice out there today, written by both people of color and white people. Search it out, break with the apathy of whiteness, and demonstrate that you care enough to put in the effort. And that passage just went straight to my heart, because I feel like, probably like most white liberals, I frequently find myself wringing my hands and wishing that things were different, but not actively or tangibly doing anything to affect change. And, you know, part of white privilege is having the opportunity to think about or address racism when we feel like it, and put it over there to think about or look at later when we want to focus on something else, or we just don't want to be upset. And so for me, I think that that just went straight to my heart, because that's the spot that I find myself in right now, where I'm committed to finding things that I can do to actively dismantle my own racism and to support other people who are on the same journey.
Thank you, Sandra. How about Holly C?
Hey.
Coombs.
So mine was in the anti-Blackness chapter, which I believe it's 122. But African Americans are not alone in this. A different but equally real form of racialized trauma lives in the bodies of most white Americans. Our projections allow us to bury this trauma by dehumanizing and then blaming the victim. If Blacks are not human in the same ways that we, white people, are human, our mistreatment of them doesn't count. We are not guilty, they are. If they are bad, it isn't unfair. In fact, it is righteous. This really sat with me. I hadn't thought of this before, that the racism, the acts, the racist acts that white people, that we've perpetuated for hundreds of years, is like living in our bodies. And it sat with me because I feel like I feel it. Like it made sense to me because I can feel it. I feel it in my physiology, the anti-Blackness. It shows up in my teaching, particularly when I'm really dysregulated in the classroom, and I notice it. And when they talked about how we dehumanize Black people, and then we feel that as long as they're bad, we're right. I notice when that comes up in my teaching. And I feel like it really makes sense to me that it's sort of somehow in our physiology. So like it's deep in me. I've been working on my own racism for a long time, and I feel that it's just like embedded in who I am. I like don't feel myself getting rid of it. So that passage was very, it's just been sitting with me.
Thank you, Holly. Lately, I just wanted to say that lately I've had that experience that it is in feeling that in the body that one can identify with the generational trauma, not just on people of color, but our upbringings and our culture as white people, that we hold so much trauma from the experience of how we've accepted racism as a way of being in our culture.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you. How about Perry?
Hi. Yeah, absolutely. Mine's from the earlier part of the book, and deals with more the thought of how we look for excuses to avoid entering into the conversation. So rather than use what you see as unique about yourself and as an exemption from further examination, a more fruitful approach would be to ask yourself, I am white and I have had X experience. How did X shape me as a result of also being white? Setting aside your sense of uniqueness is a critical skill that will allow you to see the big picture of the society in which we live. Individualism will not. For now, try to let go of your individual narrative and grapple with the collective images, the collective messages we all receive as members of a larger shared culture. Work to see how these messages have shaped your life, rather than use some aspect of your story to excuse yourself from their impact. I've lived overseas for 7-8 years, went to school in Denver public schools where we had forced desegregation. And in my opinion, it actually had a huge impact, a positive impact for me. and have worked in community outreach, and now I work as a science teacher. Sometimes I draw from those experiences and say, oh, I've got enough to take this on. And you realize over the years, that's not the case. It's a continual learning process. So that sense of trying to say, well, this isn't me, has become more and more apparent that no, you are you're a representative of a larger issue, a larger challenge, so to say. So that's how that spoke to me.
Thank you, Barry. How about Holly? Last but not least, Holly B.
Thank you. My passage, there were so many, but the one that sort of stuck out personally was on page 62. The title of the subchapter is White Racial Innocence. And she says, because we are not raised to see ourselves in racial terms or to see white space as racialized space, we position ourselves as innocent of race. On countless occasions, I have heard white people claim that because they grew up in segregation, they were sheltered from race. At the same time, we turn to people of color who may also have grown up in racially segregated spaces to learn about racism. But why aren't people of color who grew up in segregation also innocent of race? I ask my readers to reflect deeply on the idea that white segregation is racially innocent. I think for me, our situation in my family was a bit ironic because when I was 4, my father, who says he was my white father, who says he was never comfortable with racism that he experienced as a young man and boy in Texas, moved us from a newly desegregated Texas in '75 to, ironically, an even more segregated Marin County. And it's been my life mission since basically coming out of high school, maybe even before, but certainly coming out of high school, to unlearn as much as I can about, I didn't have the words for it at the time, but my privilege, and trying to really dig into letting go of any notion of being superior. But that's a process, and the book has really helped me realize that it's a continuum, and it's not, you're never done, but you're okay as long as you keep on it. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Holly. Thank you, Holly. So I'd just like to open it up before we move to the questions themselves. And are there any connections to what others have said that you want to respond to now? Is there anyone who spoke from their passage that touched you in some way that resonated and you'd like to add some thoughts to it? Holly.
Well, Perry's topic of letting go of the individual narrative as white people, well, I'm special because, that really resonated with me in the book. And in some ways it's a way to lower the desire to be defensive. If we say, this is a systemic issue, and it's not that I'm not responsible anymore, but it's less about me specifically and more about this is an issue, and I've been taught this my whole life. And also, yeah, I used to think I was special. Oh, I know. But since I've grown, realized, no, I am really not special. And it's not how I see myself either. It's how I am seen as a white person. Just like we see people we make assumptions about people make assumptions about us. And that was an interesting aspect of the book.
Thank you, Holly. Other connections.
I just, every time somebody started reading, I thought, oh yeah, I remember that. Like I took that note too. Like I remember what Mr. Carney said. I have that note, like in another answer that it did really, stick out to me. So I think just kind of, the acceptance of Gabrielle's offer to take this on and to read this book has that in and of itself, like that, it's all, you know, like with anything, the hardest part is starting. And I know that everybody is not just starting this right now, but the kind of acceptance of what, you know, the book is saying, you know, I just feel like it's just, I'm so glad that Gabrielle asked me to do this, and having read the book just does make you kind of set aside all these things that people have talked about that, you know, that a lot of us have experienced in our lives and in our teaching and in our learning. And it's very freeing, I think, to have read and to accept, you know, those things that are hard to accept and move on and continue to it's easier to, you know, approach other people and to stay open about and be honest about what's happening around us.
Thank you, Marley. Any others? Well, let's move to the second question. Was what made you most uncomfortable during your reading of the book? Is there anybody who would like to take that one first, and then we can jump off of that? Sandra.
This speaks to what Holly B was saying earlier. The thing that made me the most uncomfortable was recognizing myself in the pages and realizing, oh, I'm not different or special. I am white privileged and I'm part of the problem. And other thing about that really spoke to me was when she talks about microaggressions and becoming more aware of my microaggressions. And, you know, I think one of the things that I'm going to do moving forward is ask the people of color in my life, please point things out when you hear me say them. Because I think that a lot of people of color haven't been granted that privilege from white people to speak and to be heard. And I think, like the author says, you know, a lot of times people of color don't want to bother because of white fragility or because it seems futile. So for me, you know, reading about the different examples of microaggressions, like for example, she talks about using words like sheltered upbringing. Well, I say that, or talking about like the area where I previously taught, I'll say, you know, I taught in an at-risk area, or, you know, students who are disadvantaged, or just all of these like coded words that we use, you know, were brought to my attention as I read the book. And that's something that, you know, I want to be better about and learn more about and make progress in that area moving forward. I think that's it.
Thank you, Sandra. Charlotte.
What made me most uncomfortable was realizing how uneducated I am. I always thought, no, I've read up, I have all my degrees, I have all my experience, I led a long life, but I really, there's things in history that I was never ever aware of, how much of it has been hidden from us and how much I have not been aware. Even though I thought I was an aware person, I'm not. And that made me very uncomfortable. Because there was so much information in this book that I had no idea about, which I had no idea, I should say, and I had never heard before. So it made me uncomfortable, very uncomfortable.
Thank you, Charlotte. Others? Holly.
Connecting to what Sandra said, what made me uncomfortable was the passage about the psychic drain on Black people, to always have to navigate our sense of superiority. And I was thinking about the people of color in my life, and you know, if I like have friends over and we're having cocktails, it never occurred to me that race was on the table. Like I didn't know that they were having psychic drain by navigating my sense of superiority. I thought race was only a topic if it was discussed or something. I don't know. I mean, I see my friends of color and I know they're of color, but I thought we were just having cocktails and like venting about life. And now I see it really differently. And I guess I will do what Sandra is gonna do. Tell them that I really don't, you know, I want them to point stuff out and it's safe to. And I think about my students' parents too, that it's a psychic drain to navigate me. I don't know. I know I'm their child's white teacher. And so I know that they know that I do racist things because I'm white. And I just didn't think that they also have to sort of navigate that when we, I don't know, we're talking about a field trip or, you know, just coming into the classroom. And I'm feeling that now, the psychic drain. That was very powerful, and it was really uncomfortable for me to read.
Thank you, Holly. Anyone else? Connection to what someone else says? Sandra so bravely stepped in first to answer that, or what Holly or Charlotte said, or just your own, Molly, and then Holly. Molly, then Holly. This is such a fun conversation with y'all's names.
Yeah, I'm just going to piggyback on what Sandra and Holly both said. You know, asking, you know, a few months ago, if you had asked me like about, you know, what you both mentioned about the drain of people of color having to navigate around us, you know, I would have thought about the relationships I have, you know, whether they're friendships or at work, and thinking that they were more open than they are. And now that you say, Sandra, you know, you are going to try and ask people to be honest with you. You know, there is a teacher at the school where my kids are and where I work. And, you know, when she started working there a few years ago, and she, you know, put up, and she's African-American, put up Black Lives Matter poster, and she is unapologetic about everything she says, you know, and she will call things out. And she got a lot of backlash, and I just now, you know, that always actually I've appreciated her for doing that. And because of her, I realize the risk and how difficult it is for people to do that. And they need, you know, to be given, you know, it should go without saying, but it's not, the allowances to do that in, you know, the white spaces that they constantly have to navigate.
Thank you, Molly. Holly.
I was just going to add a little bit to what you were saying about asking people of color to key us in and call us on things. And I think in asking them to trust us, I think that's a really delicate topic, in that we need to be able to earn the trust. So it's not, I'm not going to ask someone to tell me when I'm doing something wrong. I need to set up a relationship whereby there is trust, and I've shown them that I'm willing and able to listen and to learn and to soak it in and not center myself. That's the thing about, the main thing of my work around anti-racism is to decenter myself as a white woman. So I don't expect a Black woman, a Black man to do the work for me. So that is problematic when I hear that we need to ask people of color to help us understand it, or call us on it, or be honest with us. Because it's a relationship. And if you haven't set up a relationship with a person of color, whereby you've already shown them some ability to be trusted, then I don't think it's fair to ask them to do something for us in that way. And that may not be what you're saying exactly, but I just felt like that needed to be said.
Thank you, Holly. Sandra?
Yeah, I totally appreciate what you're saying, Holly, and I agree that the onus of responsibility is on us to figure it out. I do feel that and I could be wrong, and this might be something I need to be more educated about, but my thinking is that it would be another layer in relationships that are already established between like myself and friends or family members of color. If I say, you know what, I'm open to this. You know, as sensitive and fragile as I am, I would really appreciate this feedback when you think that I need to hear something. I'm curious to hear more what you think about that, because I may be looking at it wrong. But that's kind of what I think would be good.
I'm trying to think about how to respond to that. It's always good to have an open, as much as you can be open and honest, but trust isn't so much about tell me, it's more about let me show you that I'm trustworthy and that I can hold your confidence and I can hold myself in such a way that I can truly be open and able to listen to you. And I think it's perfectly fine for a white person to acknowledge to our friends of color, family of color, you know what, I'm going to make mistakes, but I'm committed to learning and to continuing to grow and to work on my anti-racism. It's up to you if you want to call me on it, but I don't know if words are enough or if it's just one of those things where trust is complicated. That's all. Really what I'm trying to say. The trust is extremely complicated. And when there are 400 years of mistrust, both sides are both taught to be untrustworthy of each other. It's so easy to just say, hey, just tell me, okay, I'll be open. So I'm not saying you shouldn't do it, but I'm just saying it's can be very challenging, can be very problematic. Because you always have to think about, where am I doing this from my position of white supremacy? And most often we are.
I think Charles had something to weigh in on that.
Yeah,
Maybe helpful.
the thing that, and it wasn't the book that made me feel uncomfortable, but what it stirred up in me when I was reading it was the almost insurmountable task of creating some kind of empowerment for Black people to operate in this world on par with what we have. And I don't think, I always feel uncomfortable in that I feel like I'm patronizing Black people when I try to talk to them about how uncomfortable I am about white supremacy and racism. And if I ask them to help me navigate this, I think, I'm guessing that a lot of Black people just think, well, I don't care if you don't understand it. Get over it and start doing something, you know? Stop talking about it and stop flagellating yourself about your guilt and actually go out there and try something that will communicate. I come from a background of, I'm gonna be 70 this year, and I was raised in the 50s, and the good old days, as she was talking, I appreciate her bringing that up, that, you know, we hear people all the time talk about, oh, it was such a golden time in the 50s and 60s in California. All we had were, you know, Emmett Till, and we had all the, you know, people were kept in their place, and white people got to do anything they wanted, really. The good old days. And I think, I can't even imagine being a Black person listening to this rubbish and keeping quiet about it. But I think when I say they, I mean all non-white people have to put up with not only the unfairness of the system, but they also have to navigate the guilt of the people who are in it, and especially the guilt of the people who are trying to do better, because that's even an encumbrance. That's annoying, you know. And I was blatantly racist as a teenager and a man in my early 20s. I mean, blatantly. I'm not going to go into any details here. I can talk to you individually if you'd like, but it was something that I was ashamed of for years. I never even knew a Black person until I was 20 years old. I grew up in Orange County, where, you know, it's so white you can barely cast a shadow down there. And yet there was no experience with Black people. And all I got from the experience I had with Black people was through the media and through other misinformed teenagers. And in order to stay comfortable in that sect, I had to play along and go along with that misinformation, as we all do. I mean, I'm not making any excuses for it. It took a monumental shift in my attitude, brought about by great discomfort, to try to just shed all this attempt to try to, for me to get better, and to try to act as an agent of change so everybody can get better. I got to drop, if I'm going to be uncomfortable about a discussion of racism, that's just too bad for me.
Mm-hmm.
If you're a Black and you're my friend, and I count a lot of Black people, I mean, hundreds of Black people. I have a wide circle of friends. And yet, if I say something that bothers you, I trust that you will tell me about it, that you'll just call me out. I mean, James Baldwin, I was reading something about him a while back, and he said the way that he can spot a racist at a party is to stand amongst the white people and say the most outrageous thing he can think of, and then watch and see who will go along and agree with him. And he said, that's the racist. The ones who stand up to me and say, that's stupid, those are the people that will be honest with me and tell me something. But the ones who try to, oh, I understand. I've never really thought of it that way before. And I'm sure that goes on a billion times a day amongst people of color. I don't know how to navigate this, but I try to navigate it on a personal level, and I'm unsuccessful most of the time, I'm sure. And yet, by being open enough to be called on my idiocy, that's great. And I think our commonality, the things that we have in common and that people relate to, is not our opinions and our structures about racism, our intellectual thoughts, it's our stories. What's your story about how you deal with people? What's your story? Gabrielle said at the beginning, I love my dog. And even if you're if you have nothing in common with somebody, when they tell you that they love their pet, you go, I love my pet too. They must be an okay person because they love their pet. There's some connective tissue in there somewhere, and we got to find our connective tissue. We can't sit around trying to find ways to defend what we have or defend any challenge to our supremacy, I guess. I'm sorry, I was rambling. I apologize.
No, thank you, Charles. Charlotte, and then we'll move to another question.
It's funny because my reaction after reading this book, I felt that my job was to go out and be more open with other white people. I didn't think it was my point to bring any more burden on any of my people of color friends. And I actually remember I learned that from Gabrielle, one of her posts about how don't ask me what you can do. And I thought, she's right. And I really came out of it with the idea that I have to be more open. Not be more open, I have to speak up. Mm-hmm. When I have my little old white lady friends say some obnoxious things, and I have heard, they just jumped out at me more in the last month or two. And I think I can't just let that go. I mean, I have to say something to them. I was at a thing yesterday where someone started saying something, and I said, that is the most ridiculous thing I ever heard. Do you know the facts behind that? And I felt by doing that, I was helping change the system a little tiny bit at a time, which is all I can do.
Thank you. I think what I'd like to do is come and move on the questions a little bit, because some of it's been emerging. And Charles brought up a lovely point about story. And so I'm going to introduce this next question, just tangentially, this is off the top of my head, but when I first met Gabrielle, we were doing something about identity and where we grew up. And Gabrielle explained this story of like listening to the clink of the ice cubes of the family drinking and playing poker in the next room. And I thought, was she at my house? And she, as a kid, and here she was an African. I knew she wasn't in my family because in my present family, we were white, right? And so, but it was such a connection. I thought, wow, Gabrielle and I have this connection. I think I know her a little better because of this thing that didn't have to do about race, but I knew it was a different story. But I felt this heart connection with her around it. and she might comment on that later. She may not even remember that, or I heard it wrong, but I sure felt connected. So in terms of story, the question kind of was like, well, let's lift up how we talk about race, or what's the story in our families right now, or with our friends, or where we're sitting right now. Where are you with this dialogue and reflection around race? Is there anything that new, like Charlotte said, she's, has this new awareness of, oh, I feel more empowered to say something in this culture that I live in. Is there anything else? Is there something that you've learned or want to talk to the rest of us about this dialogue and reflection on race, what it looks like in your daily life?
I can start on it. Maybe.
Perry.
Yeah. I come from mom and dad who are Connecticut liberals, but I grew up in Colorado. So, I'm coming from this point, my parents are open-minded, and they can, my mom's passed away, but my dad will still say these crazy things, even though he's intellectually open-minded. Well, here's a great example. He loves Wheel of Fortune. How was Wheel of Fortune last night? This black man won all this money. It was wonderful. I watch it because I want to see the black people win. And it's one of those, okay, Dad, you're getting there, but in my opinion, it's like, you're still not quite getting it. Yeah, so we'll have small discussions on that as much as he can process that. So it's sort of the danger of being a bleeding heart liberal, I guess, versus being I love what has come up about stories. I think this is all about stories and listening to stories and learning from those, so that you're looking at someone else's perspective. I mean, right now when I'm listening to all of you, I'm like, you're all in my head and you're just putting words to my thoughts. It's like a collective brain here that represents me in so many ways. So that's how I get challenged at home with what's supposed to be a forward-looking, modern, supposedly non-racist family dynamic, let's say.
Thank you, Perry.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody else? What's your daily life experience around talking about reflecting on race? Charlotte?
Well, I've had a lot of discussions just about the term racist in the last month or two, because when I started realizing that I had the totally wrong definition of what a racist is as well. And so many people, when you start talking about what's happening in the world today, they start talking about, well, I know I'm not a racist. It's the first thing they say, or I know she's not a racist. And I have to come on and say, we're all racist. I mean, that's really what Robin DiAngelo is saying in her book, is that we are racist. We can't avoid being racist because it's the system that has been set. And actually, to get away from the word racist and talk about the racist system, because it's a system that we're really fighting, not people so much as a system. And when you get people to understand that it's a system that's off, and you're not attacking them personally, I found that I've been able to have a lot deeper discussions.
Thank you, Charlotte. That was one of the questions that some of you lifted up in your quotes, this difference between racism and individual prejudice, and that people have those convoluted, and they've been convoluted and kept convoluted so that we could keep these systems in place, right? So thank you for that. Charles, did you have your hand?
Yeah, I think that it would be worthwhile to have a different word for it. Racist has so much baggage attached to it. We think of, Simon Legree and whippings and all that stuff. And as she said in the book very eloquently, it has nothing to do with being a bad person. It's just that we have acclimated ourselves to a certain position based on the color of our skin, pretty much. And we use that when it's to our advantage, and we pull back when we don't care. And we are the only ones who have the power to do that. And until we, instead of saying you're a racist, which makes everybody's hackles go up, you use that word, and it's a really abrasive word. And it's not like it hurts my snowflake heart. It's just, it's such a powerful word, and it has so much history attached to it, that to find a modern word for that benign acceptance of the ownership and the commodity of our color, our skin color. For white people, it's a commodity. I knew a guy who was a comic, who was a comedian, who was an older gentleman, and he said, I can walk into any office building in America and make free copies, because he was white and wore a tie. It's true. I can walk into any boardroom in Los Angeles right now dressed just like this, with no one knowing who I am, and walk in, and people will offer me water. They'll offer me a seat. They'll get me coffee. They don't even know who I am. Just the fact that I'm there because I have my skin color, they will do that for me. My friend Robert, I have a good friend named Robert who he's a dark-skinned black man. If Robert walked into that building, they wouldn't let him past the receptionist. And he's a handsome, delightful human being, and he would be stopped immediately, even if he was dressed like I am, simply because of the color of his skin. And what is that? Is it the receptionist a racist? Well, maybe, but let's find another word for a way we can work with them on that, work with each other on that, rather than go right to the finger pointing and you're bad and you're a fool or you're an idiot for doing that, and see what the story is that made you feel that way, you know?
Thank you, Charles. Any other stories about the way that you're talking about or reflecting on race now in your own families or communities? Holly, see?
I don't want to get rid of the word racism or racist. When I think about myself, I do feel that like I have been exploring my own racism for a while, but I'm very complacent. So I don't actually like step out and do much other than like try and, you know, be a better teacher. But I'm very much still in the like the trying to be agreeable and not like upset, I guess, other people, the white solidarity. But I feel that I'm complicit right now while Black people are getting the equivalent of whippings and beatings and lynching. And I don't actually really see a difference between me and what did happen in the 1950s. I think, honestly, if push comes to shove, a lot of white people would find that in themselves. And so I just want to go deeper and deeper in myself. Like what I was saying in the beginning about the white trauma that gets, you know, the trauma that gets passed down. Like I feel like I have that. So as I've been reading more this summer and like watching more and learning more about history, I realized that I just chose not to know this before, but Black people are getting killed constantly, like all around us, and we're not doing anything. I'm not sure that makes me different than the slave master types, you know, the wife who like sat by and watched, to be honest.
Thank you, Holly. I think for me, I always facilitate by being involved. Really speaks to me because it is in really, really owning the privilege that I've carried as a white person without, and always thinking that I was, you know, not a racist. I'm not a racist as you know, it's that idea of the KKK and the full on, you know, it's like to be able to say I'm not one of them doesn't mean I'm not my own version of racism. And my own version of racism is that I live as a white woman and I have certain privileges like Charles spoke about. I can walk into certain environments. I can do certain things just by the privilege of my whiteness. And because of that, I'm conspiring in a system that was built to give me those privileges. So that's, for me, the awareness of all the ways in which the system was actually set up that way so I would have those privileges. And every time I notice myself, I'll even think sometimes, well, I can do this because I know I can walk, I can do that, whereas somebody else couldn't. And I have to think, should I do that? Or should I now speak about the fact that I have that privilege and how unfair that is and what systems I need to change to get that? So to me, there's a real connection between my own privilege as a white person who has lived in that and taken advantage of that system, and then to call myself on how not to take advantage of it, and more than that, to act against it in some way. Holly B, did you have your hand?
Yes, thank you. To kind of piggyback on that, I lead a few groups, couple online on Facebook. One's a divorced mothers group. Another one, I'm an integral part of a philanthropic education organization where we fund education, college and beyond for women in this country. And it's 150 years old. And I have been using my voice and my privilege to create awareness of the fact that we have inequity in society, but also in the organization. A lot of our recipients are women of color, but a lot of our actual chapter members are, white. And a lot of them are from the Midwest. They find themselves very religious and very unwilling to see what racism beyond segregated South and lynchings look like. And so I've been using my voice to call attention to white fragility and calling other, these all are women, but calling these women out on their privilege about, trying to see just how segregated we are, while also giving space to elevate the voices of our Black and Brown members too. And I think that's how I've been trying to use my privilege as someone who can speak out and I do have a level of authority to a degree within these organizations. So I've been trying to, I actually, in one of our groups, we actually silenced all the white participants for 3 weeks, right around the time, it was right around the time that George Floyd was killed. And we just wanted to show people just how much of a privilege they have, that they can go on their lives and talk about their divorces and their kids, while a large faction of our population is grieving on a real visceral level, the loss of yet one more Black man in custody of police, not even in custody, just having been arrested. So it was really powerful to kind of silence the white people for a little bit. And what we found in the smaller divorced moms group is that suddenly some of the Black and Brown members were saying, gosh, yeah, we are the minority in this group, and we do feel overtaken by the white voice a lot of times. So I'm doing what I can to really discuss and show people as much as possible as a white person, also the difference between equity and equality, but also doing what I can to shut us up because we talk too much. We don't listen, we don't learn.
Thank you, Holly. So I'm just going to jump down to a question and then open it up, see who wants to take the first stab at it. Is how does your own defensiveness get in the way of having conversations? Like, what is the thing that you get defended about? You're like, oh, okay, that shuts me down a little bit. I'm not going to take that risk, because I think it is taking the risk that people of color have to take every single day. That's the risk we're being asked to take, is to step into those places of discomfort. So, and it's defensive. It's a defense against that risk of that hurt. So what do you think is your edge there that the defensiveness gets in the way for you? What's there? Okay, thank you, Charlotte.
I'll start. I mean, I know from the first thing that comes to mind for me is whenever anyone says white privilege or starts saying anything about race, I feel guilt. I get this strong feeling of guilt of, what did I do wrong? You know, I must have done something wrong because things aren't turning out the way they should have turned out. So it must be because of something I did. And I don't know if it's just me. I just feel guilt. And I can remember the first time I had a talk about white privilege. And I was in a group and I said something about how that term made me uncomfortable. I don't know if any of you know Lavanya Dijon, but she just jumped on me and she educated me really well that day. And I learned that I have to try to turn off the guilt. I can't. I mean, it's just instinctive within me that I have the guilt, but I have to try to turn that off and listen to what actually is happening out there and realize that it's not my fault.
Thank you, Charlotte. Sandra.
I think that a lot of my defensiveness comes from wanting things to be different than they are. And I think that's like a real hazard of the white liberal, is that we try to think that maybe there was a misinterpretation, or maybe things are different than how they were perceived by a person of color. And in my own family, my husband's African American, and our oldest son is identified as African American by other people, and our second son, who's a few years younger, is identified as white by the outside world. And as they go out together and share space, they have very different experiences. So now it's completely undeniable that they're having different experiences in a shared space. And I think that one of the things that I've been working on for years and continue to is to just be able to hear the experience of a person of color and be completely open to hearing it without having that guilt or that quick response to try to make things better. Because there's nothing I can say that will make it better. And often what I say is making it worse. So just, being in a space of more listening, less fixing that's not fixing.
Thank you, Sandra. I very much resonate with that. I think that's where my defensiveness comes in. And it's not only about race, but it's certainly in racial conversations that it hurts me when I hear the stories, and I want to make people feel better. I want to make it better. And that's not how, I can't make it better. And so it ends up making it worse by me being that, minimizing it. So I have a tendency to then minimize the thing that someone has shared because I'm trying to say it's not so bad, or, it could be. And that's been real work for me as a parent and as a partner, and as a teacher, to just let that sit and empathize with that, and just by listening versus making it about me. trying to make it better and fixing it. And that's been that causes me to, that's where my defensiveness comes in, is I want to be the one to be able to fix it, and I can't. Other people. Perry? Or Charles, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, I butted in. Perry.
That's okay. Was it you? Let's go with Perry and then we'll go with Charles.
No, it's Charles. Charles had the comment.
Charles.
No, I just said there's a lot of pain in that too, when you realize you can't help people and you are just one tiny grain of something. The frustration that comes with that, the impatience that comes with that, which causes anger. And anger doesn't help anything except when you're trying to direct it against a problem and get it, try to beat it into submission if you can. But yeah, anger and pain and sadness, I guess, comes with this too. I'm sorry, Perry, please.
Thank you, Charles.
Absolutely, somewhat similar is when you're denied that feeling to help, I guess, or to understand. I always go back to the 80s, and I think I'd have a few friends, you'd ask them, hey, can you explain this to me, or what happened or whatever, and it'd be, you won't understand, it's a black thing. And the wall would suddenly come down, and you're like, no, but I want to know. Oh no, it's a black thing. And I've seen over, dear God, now that's what, 3 decades later, the reason for that is I didn't have the context to understand their story. And I may never will, because I will never, I mean, this whole kind of fantasy of walking someone else's shoes, it's about half truth. You still have to find a way to navigate their reality with your upbringing, your life. And so trust will always have its limits. And that's one of the things that always makes me very defensive. It's like, no, but I want to reach that level. And now I've become, for lack of a better term, more and more comfortable with that I will never reach it, but I have to constantly pursue it. So that's been helpful for me to try to find ways to continue moving forward, as well as discussions like this. I mean, your perspectives have really opened up some ideas of how to connect and how to keep that forward momentum going.
Thank you, Perry. My mentor, one of my greatest mentors, has taught that it's not the effectiveness of what you do in things like this that we measure. We don't measure it in that short-term effectiveness of that in the moment, but rather our faithfulness to stay on that journey, and keep moving toward that goal, toward that light, you know. And it's not to diminish that we shouldn't be effective at things, but that it's a paradox again. If we go for short-term effectiveness, we end up doing things that shut down things. And I'd also like to make the connection with what Holly C. was saying in the very beginning. For me, it's the ability to feel that discomfort in my body and then learn to sit with it, that allows me to feel less uncomfortable having the conversations that I need to have, because I know what it feels like and I don't have to push it away. I can say, oh, this is that feeling of discomfort. Oh, this might be why, oh, that means something's happening here. You know, so I am being in it, and being in it is important. So Gabrielle and I went back and forth. There's just 2 questions that I'd like to pose. I think they go together. And the first one is, and you can answer these in any, like, if they go together for you or not, answer one or the other, or just kind of merge them together in a response. But they are, would the people of color you interact with consider you a friend? And is it possible to overcome racism without having Black friends? So would the people that you, of color in your life that you interact with, consider you a friend? Is that your interpretation? And do you think it's possible to overcome racism without having Black friends? Molly.
The friendship part of the question, I'm sure I know a lot of people of color who you're friends with so many people, and that who I might consider a friend and they might not. And having been asked this question, I probably think about it, I've thought about it for the first time, and it's, it's one of those kind of, oh, well, I'm sure there are a lot of people who don't consider me a friend, who I may consider a friend, and we'll go back to what we were talking about before about trust and how it's, a very complex thing. And it takes time to build trust, and you build trust through these experiences and what you're willing to give. And so I think that there are definitely, I do have people of color who consider me a friend, and I'm sure there are plenty out there who would not put me on that list. The second part of the question, is it possible to overcome racism without having Black friends? Probably not, because I think that you can certainly move in the right direction, but I think that, you can be racist towards all sorts of people, not just Black people. And the racism that we have in this country with African Americans it's a very, unique and history. So I think that, just being, if you don't, I don't see how you can overcome racism without having interactions with people, and having, you need to understand people's lives and just to be a part of those lives. I don't think that you can overcome that without those experiences. I think it's the experiences that you have that lead to, friendships and to, moving along the continuum.
Thank you, Molly. Anybody else? Holly.
I'm lucky to have two sort of, I would characterize them as besties. These are my go-to people. One is a trans man who had a baby before he transitioned, and the other is a Black gay veteran. And those are my two people that I trust inherently and who do consider me their bestie. They both indicated as such. So I'm going to say yes on that first one. I think the second one is a little bit harder to answer in a yes and no statement. I will say, as I'm a queer woman, and I'm not Christian, but I was baptized and my family is very Christian. But I learned from the time I first came out that Christians were going to hate me, and so I really pushed back. I left, like I said, I wasn't terribly religious to begin with, but I left that all behind, and it was a very difficult relationship with people who were Christian, and I couldn't be fully myself. But over the recent years, I've become Facebook friends with some of my cousins that I grew up with in Texas, and they are evangelical. And I think I wouldn't be able to forgive some of the people. I mean, Christians, to me, it's such a, I'm going to bring it back to racism, I promise. But Christians, to me, it's such a, I have such strong feelings about. But sort of reconnecting with my past and my family has reminded me that, well, there's a lot more to their beingness than their Christianity, even though it's a huge part of their lives. And I think I'm not coming back. I'm not going to be Christian again. I'm not going to be religious again, but I have an appreciation for who they are as people. And I think you can, on the surface, be anti-racist if you don't have Black people in your lives or friends. but I think it's really a surface thing. And I think it really takes that connection. Like I think Charles, you were saying about, you know, connecting with Gabrielle because she has a dog and we love dogs. You know, it's that connection that really starts to break down some of the prejudices that we carry. Is being able to connect on a personal level does make a big difference. It doesn't bring us the entire way because that is a process, but I think it brings us further along than we might otherwise be. Just like if you don't know a gay person, you know, I'm told by people who don't know me, oh, you know, my lifestyle. I'm not sure what that means. I get up, I feed my kid, I send him to school, I go to work. Like, what's different about my lifestyle, you know? So like I said, I think it can bring us up to a point, but it's our job to really focus on the rest. But I think we can, but I don't think we can get to where we really need to be without having people of color truly in our lives.
Thank you, Holly. Charlotte?
Well, I tend to agree with both of you about whether you have friends, Black friends or not. I mean, some of them I may consider friends and they may not consider me. And it's hard to make the same connections because we have such a different background so many times. But I think on the second question, I would be very, very scared to say, and it would worry me and make me feel very unhappy, or not happy, devastated to say that if you don't have a Black person in your life, there's no way you can be anti-racist. Because there are so many people in my life that do not have, and in my generation especially, you know, I'm well over my 70s, and I have people, family members, friends who have never had connections with people of color. Never. I mean, other than maybe in work or they were served by that, but they don't have any relationship with a person of color. But it would devastate me to think that they can't somehow come to an understanding of what the racist system is doing in this world today. And I'm naive. I know that. I will say that from the get-go that I am naive, but I have to hope that even these people who don't have these connections can still see that the system is wrong.
Thank you, Charlotte. Anybody else on that? Charles?
Yes, boy, this is really great. I mean, I'm enjoying this conversation so much. And I don't love Gabrielle because she has a dog. I love Gabrielle. Just for the record.
Of course.
But, I think I'm probably not a good enough observer to know if my Black friends would consider me a friend, because I don't know what their whole idea of what the expectation is for our friendship. But I try to be open to them, and as best I can. If there's a reason that I wouldn't be a good friend, I would hope that they would feel comfortable enough saying something. I have a gay friend who came out. This is years ago, and he told me that he was gay one time when we were having dinner, and he said, "I have to tell you this." And I said, "Well, that doesn't bother me." And he said, "Yeah, but you made comments about gay people when you thought I was straight, and I was afraid to tell you." Mm-hmm. And that just really was surprising, because I never thought I had that kind of prejudice, but I did. And I never thought I was discriminatory in that way, but I was. And so I hope my friends would be forgiving. When I was in my 30s and still idealistic, I did some volunteer work for the Catholic worker downtown and clean pots. You know, I go down there and clean pots. And one day they needed me on the serving line, and I went out there and I was serving people in the line. And a Black gentleman came up, a street guy, and he said, he took a look at me and he said, "Well, isn't it nice that the nice white folk the nice white people came down here to help serve us poor Black folk?" And so I gave him his food, and he glowered at me and walked off. Well, I'd been recommended to go down there by a friend of mine who was a nun, Sister Lorraine, And so when I came back to report to Sister Lorraine, I told her that story because I was angry. I was steaming when he said that. It's like, I came down here on my day off, and washing pots and pans and trying to be helpful. And this is the thanks I get, And she said, did you thank him for what he said? And I said, what are you talking about? No, I didn't thank him. And she said, St. Vincent de Paul says, may the poor forgive us for our charity. And I think in the context of race, all of our efforts to do something to be outgoing and connective with other people, I hope they will forgive us for our clumsiness at our charity, and our clumsiness at trying to create some connection, because it's always going to be awkward and it's always going to be painful. And I don't think it can ever happen unless you have Black people in your life, or people of color, I guess, Black and Latino and other people that are, but I don't see, it's like being on a flight simulator and wondering if you could ever really fly the plane. You don't know until you get in the cockpit and try, before you do it. I guess that's kind of a dramatic, you wouldn't want to try it and just fail, but there's that risk here and I find, or have found over the years, that being a welcome participant in the lives of my Black friends has made me a better human being, because I really enjoy the culture, which I never understood before. And all of my racism was directed at the culture. And that's what I thought that they were like, they were like. And I realized they invited me to their homes. They've been kind to me. I've never been abused by a Black person. I've never been shouted down by a Black person. I've only been met with kindness. And I think if more people who don't have interactions with people of color had them, that not only their hearts would change, but their observations and their souls would change too. That's just my 2 cents. Thanks.
Thank you, Charles. Well, we just have a little more time, and I'd like to, we could go on all day. We could meet every week if now Gabrielle don't get any ideas. Or maybe you should. I'd like to move us toward this this question it got lifted up, and I think Charlotte spoke to it beautifully, of how do you have conversations with people, and patience in those conversations with other people that you are in relationship with, that you love, or just have to be in relationship with, so you can go from both directions, who are in the process of learning about racism, especially when they seem to be exhibiting a lot of fragility around this, or they seem to not, they're just talking about color blindness. They're just being at the place, well, I'm not racist, I'm not, what are ways in which you maintain patience in those conversations? Maybe that will help some of us, because that's a struggle that I know I have, is how do I not just say, well, just such a racist, and then they just say, I don't like you anymore, Margaret, and I'm leaving, and you need to leave, which has happened to me more times than I like to acknowledge within my own family, and in conversations in educational settings where I just come off as, y'all are racist, that's racist. And I think things are shifting a little bit that way. Like, people are starting to go, okay, but not everyone. And people are on really different learning journeys. So any thoughts on that from you guys? What have you learned, and how do you maintain that patience? Sandra?
I have a quick thought. As I mentioned, I have 3 sons. They actually all are perceived differently. Like I said, my first son, people assume he's African American. My second one, people assume he's white. My third son, people assume he's Latinx, and that he would speak Spanish. So when we had our second son and I would be out with my boys, I was constantly asked questions that were so inappropriate and so invasive. People would ask things like, do they have the same father? What are they? You know, you can imagine, you've heard the questions. And so I developed 2 mantras. So when somebody would come at me with one of these questions, I would say, meet ignorance with love. Because really, a lot of the things that people ask and say, it's from a place of ignorance. And if we shut it down as racist, then they don't have the opportunity to learn. And things aren't going to get better. So my 2 little mantras would be, meet ignorance with love. And this is an opportunity for me to educate this person. And so then I would, you know, get into a dialogue and explain, like, I'd answer their question if I was comfortable answering it. And if I wasn't, I would explain why I found their question offensive and inappropriate, but in a way that allowed for dialogue and conversation and, you know, with effort not to put anyone on the defense or have anyone shut down because of it.
Thank you, Sandra. Holly?
I think about unconditional love and how that is something that I aspire to have. Like, I don't, but I'm aspiring for unconditional love. And when other people are talking about their ideas, I feel that I can see myself in them. You know, that there's not just one path starting at racist and going to not racist. It doesn't quite work like that, where we're in different like levels. I don't quite know how the path works, but I imagine there's just many different, you know, aspects to it. And it might just be that that is one area that I might have done more thinking on than that person. But, you know, me 5 years ago, I might be that person. And also me in another area around racism, I haven't done any thinking. I mean, there's so many aspects to it. Like even the connection with racism and environmental justice. I haven't done any thinking on that, but other people in the world really have. And I would seem completely ignorant if someone was going to talk to me about, you know, the connection between our climate and racism. So I guess I just get back to the love and thinking that really, like, I'm not any better than them or really any farther along because they've done their thinking about something else.
Thank you, Holly. I like getting back to the love. That's always a good place to go. Anybody else? Holly B and then Molly.
I think I've had some really hard discussions in the last few months, and my number one, I guess, rule of thumb is to never call anybody a racist, because that's just the end of the conversation. When you set up a conversation by saying you're racist, that there's no place for that to go. So I try to understand, I try to listen and really understand where they're coming from, where they are in the process. I saw, maybe you all have seen it too, but I saw a photo of a guy, I think he was in a wheelchair, tattooed and everything. And he had a sign that said, "I'm sorry I'm late, but I'm here," in relation to Black Lives Matter. And I realized that that's really powerful. And there's always, I don't know what percentage, I'll say 95% of the people, white people that I've talked to, there's space in trying to understand where they are and coming to them from whatever piece they're giving, talking to them in that way. And acknowledging, you know, people, I do see a lot of fear within white people. And as a white person, I can acknowledge that and say, what I'm seeing from you is fear. But what I'm encouraging you to do is to look at it this way. And, you know, I may offer my own, like, yeah, I get it. Some of this is scary. And acknowledging where they are, which isn't acknowledging their racism. It's just acknowledging that they're in a process and I don't know where they are and I don't know where they're going. But just tagging them as racist, nobody wants to be called racist because we all think of racism as, you know, segregation or slavery or lynchings. And we're not even talking about that at this point, although that is happening. I'm not going to disregard that. But, and there are some people, that believe, well, we had Obama as president, so we're a post-racial society. I can talk till I'm blue in the face, but they're not going to hear me. So I can't. I'm just not going to engage people who will not engage the conversation at all. And I remember a few weeks ago, I was getting so tired, like I'm exhausted. And then a friend of mine who is a person of color, she's Black, she mentioned something about like, all right, white folks, this is a long haul situation. Don't get burned out. Don't get burned out. We need you to be working on this. Don't get exhausted. Figure out some way where you can connect. Some people that means marching in the street. Other people that means writing letters to their Congress people or, politicians. For some people, it just means, sitting in front of a book. Whatever it is that you can do it and don't burn yourself out. And so I've stopped my breath when it comes to people who I can tell they're digging in their heels. They're not going to go any further. Okay, I'm not going to worry about that. I'm going to talk to the ones who will give me a tiny inkling, and I'll meet them where they are and just try to open their eyes and encourage, like, here's a really good book. Okay, you don't want to read the book, right, Fragility? Okay, here's a definition of it. Think about it. Think about how you're coming across. Think about the words. Let me give you some real world examples that you might understand. And it's tiresome. And it's hard to have patience, but at the same time, I feel like I owe it to my friends of color to not burn out and to not give up. So.
Thank you, Holly. Any others before we turn to our last question? Molly, that's right. You had your hand. Sorry.
I was just thinking about, what Holly said about how there are, like, I know certain people who are those people that you think of, like, they're the ones where I'm just kind of haven't been willing to go there because it's so difficult and so painful and extreme. So what I do is assume I'm kind of on the same page as other people who are making the same mistakes as I am, and then practice on them and have these conversations with them. And I'm hoping that by doing that over and over again and, catching the little things and, just showing up with patience and humility, that hopefully that will get me to those other more difficult conversations.
Thank you. Patience and humility. And a little chutzpah in there too. So I think I'd like to just end by a round of appreciation for all of you and an opportunity for you to express any appreciation and a resource, any resource that you have found useful or are currently, and I know we all have pages and pages of them because everybody's been sharing pages and pages, but are there one or two that, and I'll even say you can say two because there's two I can think of, that you think have been the most transformative for you or that you think have been helpful for you to teach, to be a teacher for others, a real teacher, not just a preacher, but a teacher. So anyone like to start? Okay, Holly C.
As a teacher, I felt the Glenn Singleton training was very transformative. I was able to have him twice in my teaching career, and that was very helpful for the school setting. And then I just this summer signed up for Catrice Jackson is someone who does this course called Catriceology, and it's for white women. She's Black, and it's a month-long course, and she sends you weekly assignments. And she's like a straight shooter, like she cuts through all the bullshit, and I recommend it.
Thank you, Holly. It's recorded.
I just got
Perry, we'll go around. Perry, is there?
Oh, mine was, I worked with Glenn a couple times too from Pacific Educational Group. So I think it's Beyond Diversity and Courageous Conversations. So any chance, and I think in many ways you have to have begun the path for it to be the most helpful. Not to say that it won't engage an entire district, but it's definitely initiates and as a catalyst to a growth process.
Awesome. Thank you. I'm with you on the Glenn. I met Glenn many years ago, and I think it was my really beginning of a journey there. Gabrielle has asked us to put anything in the chat. So just go ahead and type in the chat to everyone if you're sharing a resource. Sandra?
For appreciation, I would like to say I'm so appreciative of everyone coming together to have this conversation. I felt really excited and nervous about doing this, and that's kind of my favorite space to be in because I feel like that's where the growth happens. So I appreciate this opportunity so much. A resource that I found recently is a website of a man, Eddie Moore Jr., and I'll put it in the chat in a moment. But he has a 21-day racial equity challenge. And it's these great list of resources, and it's broken into sections like read, listen, think, watch, do, maybe 6 or 7 different areas. And a lot of them are quick things. It's a 3-minute video, or it's a 5-minute read, or, you know, and going from there. So what I did was I invited friends through Facebook to participate in the 21-day challenge. And then the group of people that were interested in participating were meeting once a week virtually to have conversations about what most impacted us that week, that we chose to do from the challenge. And so I'm getting really excited about that, and the people that are participating are excited, and I'm hoping to take it somewhere after this, whether it's continuing to host like equity, like the same thing, the 21-day challenges, or whether it's going deeper or supporting other people doing the same type of thing on their own. So I would say that's a great resource for people who don't know where to start, for people who are wringing their hands going, I don't know what to do or where to start.
Beautiful. Thank you, Sandra. Charlotte?
Robin DiAngelo has a website, and on the website she has a resources page. And so, there's some great things in her resource. The 21 days challenge is in it. And I just before we came on today, I was watching a TED Talk that she recommended, how to deconstruct racism, one headline at a time. That was fantastic. That there's a whole lot of resources on that page that I would recommend that anyone. And oh, she also has a whole section on how teachers, education, school, and teachers, and 27 mistakes white teachers make, and in the resource schedule, in the resource page. So it's got a lot of different things there that I would highly recommend.
Thank you, Charlotte. Would you see, do you want to write that website in the chat, or?
RobinDiAngelo.com.
Okay, great. Thank you. Others?
We also have everybody's email, right?
Yeah, everybody email Gabrielle sent out.
Is anybody here a high school teacher?
I am.
Former.
Okay, I'll send out, I'm pretty sure it's a free seminar for high school teachers on race, slavery, and inequality through the Newberry Library here in Chicago. I'll send it.
Thank you.
I'd like to share 2 resources. I think in the last few years, Ta-Nehisi Coates has been one of my biggest teachers, strictly because, like you guys started this with English teachers, I just love great literature. And when he wrote Between the World and Me, he merged the reality in such a beautifully written way that I was blown apart. Like my heart was just broken open with that, about whiteness. And I think that book, for anybody who has that propensity to see it, like you can really get it through that book. I did anyway. And all my kids have read it now. And the other one that I've been using a lot as a teaching resource is the Smithsonian Institute actually has a really great website about having conversations about race. And it breaks down all these concepts, like all the things about between institutional racism, structural racism, racism as prejudice. That's really helpful for having those conversations with people who are trying to just figure out those new things in a really, really, really helpful way. So I've been going to that website a lot lately. Anyone else want to?
I'll just share a gratitude. Gratitude of 25 years of knowing and adoring Gabrielle. And thank you so much for trusting us to bring us together. I feel very honored, feel very touched, and I've learned a lot from listening. And thank you. In terms of resources, I don't have any strong, beyond what you've all said, books or things. I just tend to read everything I can. I read articles about microaggressions, about obviously white fragility, about Stamped is a great book. And I'm completely blanking. I can't pronounce his name. It's off the top of my tongue, but I'm starting to get tired. So I can't remember. Kendi,
Stamped from the Beginning.
Yes, thank you. But I'm so grateful to be part of this. And I would be perfectly thrilled if we met again, because this is just not even an iceberg tip. This is a tiny piece, but I'm so grateful to be part of it.
Charlotte.
I also want to thank Gabrielle for starting me on this journey. Encouraged me. I actually read this book twice. And both, because the first time I read it on my Kindle, and I kept thinking, I want to go back and redo things, and I can't do it on the Kindle, so I had to get the book so I could highlight and reread and do a more thorough thing. And then there's also a video of Robin DiAngelo. It's Seattle Public Library. And it's her, in 2018, when this book first came out, she gave a talk, which is almost a review of the book. And I've watched that video twice too, and I swear I learned something new every time I reread something or watch the videos. And so it just led me on to look for other things, and it started my journey. And I want to thank Gabrielle for starting my journey.
Thank you, Charlotte. Any other voices, Charles?
Yes, I would like, and there's Gabrielle. I'd like to thank Gabrielle for inviting me to join you guys. This is such a, what else can you do except try to change things around you? And I mean, I've been locked in here for the last 5 months. I can't go out there. I'm high risk. I do a parkour run through the grocery store once a week, but so I don't really get out there and I'm not able to change anybody, and I'm not foolish enough to get into a discussion with anybody on Facebook about this. But I really enjoyed everyone's experiences here. It's really I miss teaching. I miss being in a classroom. I don't miss grading papers, but I do miss all the other things that go along with it. And it kind of revived that joy for me to hear you talk about what you're doing here to bring to your students is such a noble thing. I mean, that's not too high a word for it. And I would like, if we did this, if we want to meet every week and, but if we want to do this again, I would like to see some Black people involved in the conversation, because I like to hear, I don't want to be a sounding board for my own ignorance. Sometimes I feel like that. And I would like to hear someone else's reactions too, and maybe guide each other along in this, because it's a good conversation to start, and it's also a good conversation to continue. So again, thank you all. And Margaret, you're a fantastic host. Thank you. You did a great job.
Thank you, Charles.
I'm going to jump in because we're almost at 4 o'clock, and being a teacher and facilitator at heart, I'm really conscious of time. So there are a couple things. So first of all, I just want to say thank you. Thank you, Margaret, for moderating this conversation. And thank you all for allowing me to just witness this. This was a great experience for me. Like, I really went into this just being curious about what would it be like like to listen in on the conversation, and I was able to do that, and this was just really enlightening and even hopeful, because oftentimes I feel like sometimes I just feel hopeless, and especially with what's going on in the world. And I think about, I was telling some friends, I was like, I got arrested 30 years ago on the Bay Bridge for protesting the first Rodney King verdict, and here we are 30 years later, and we're still doing the same thing. And so it's just, and that's just my experience, So just listening to you all speak on this, I took some notes, but I was really just absorbing the conversation, really, and like I'm full, and I really just have to kind of sit and marinate on a lot of what you said. The fact that you are having conversations or inspired to have conversations, or even just, Charlotte, when you said when you get together with your little old white lady friends, and just doing what you need to do. It's like, I'm full. I really don't even have the words other than just thank you so much for allowing me to witness this. I just created the opportunity, but you all were the ones that, chose to participate. And so I really do appreciate that. I really do, from the bottom of my heart. So on that note, I don't want to keep people beyond now, because we've been on here for 2 hours. It's a long day. And so I just want to say thank you. I will follow up as soon as I can. I will send out the Zoom recording to you all, and I'll make sure the resources that you typed in the chat are also made available. And if there's a desire to continue this type of conversation, you have everyone's emails, and if I decide to host another conversation, I will definitely let you know. You will receive the invite. So thank you. Just thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Gabrielle, can we end with a poem?
Thank you for reminding me. All right. Margaret, do you want to read it first, and then I'll read it again?
All right, well, I'll read it, and then we'll hear it in a second voice. We'll hear it in yours.
Okay.
This is a poem by Cleo Wade from her book, Poetic Wisdom for a Better Life. She's an African-American woman, and she says, "What to do with what we learn. I did not come into this room to see the world through your eyes. I cannot do that. I came here to listen, not merely with my ears, but with my heart. Tell me your story, and I may leave loving more and knowing better. May I leave here carrying you in my spirit as I walk out of this room and into another." Thank you.
What to do with what we learn. I did not come into this room to see the world through your eyes. I cannot do that. I came here to listen, not merely with my ears, but with my heart. Tell me your story, and may I leave loving more and knowing better. May I leave here carrying you in my spirit as I walk out of this room and into another. Thank you, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your evening or day, and I will be in touch with you soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Be safe, Gabrielle. Drive
I
safely.
will.
Thanks so much.
Thanks. Bye.
Be safe.
Bye.
See you later.
Thank you. I will. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Gabrielle, thank you.
Bye,
Thank
Bye
you.
now.
Bye.
Hurry up.
everyone.